my gosh. It has finally come. It is the final discussion of Crime and Punishment. Thank you three so much for doing this for me and doing it Halloween style. I mean, we look pretty good, wouldn't you say? What kind of made you guys pick who you wanted to be? Christy, why did you pick the ghost of, I'm not even going to try to say names today. Not happening.
Because I have a nice white nightgown.
Oh,
it seemed very
nice.
Ghostly. So
very
that's
nice.
why I chose her.
It's very pretty.
Thank you.
Sarah?
I was in the Halloween store and I saw this ridiculous hat, and I know there's like a whole discussion in the first little bit about him and his ridiculous hat. So that's really
nice. Nice. How about you, Victoria?
Well, I thought I was going to go for like a Marmeladov look, but then with the mustache, I was like, this looks way more detective-y. I was like, okay, I think I'm Porphyria instead. And then the hat that I have, I think this is Julio's hat and Julio's jacket. And it's a fake mustache. This is going to totally fall off while I'm talking. So I'm sorry if I just like, I'm talking and then my mustache just leaves me.
Yeah.
Don't worry, my braid's going to come out, I'm sure, before the end.
Well, you look beautiful. If I was going to pick a ghost, I'd want to see you in my home. So I just wanted to have an axe in my head. I was like, I'm going to wear an axe.
Yeah, Danny, you look amazing. You went all out.
You all look amazing.
When I go all out. I just boom right into it. But yeah, so thank you so much for, dressing up today. Happy Halloween, everyone. I cannot believe that we are to the end of our show. I can't believe it. It's been 2 months, but it just feels like it was such a short amount of time. So I'm super excited to be able to have this final show and really just dive into the rest of the book. I know that the last part that we've read here is just the part 6 in the epilogue, but we're going to really discuss a lot of the book as a whole. So we're going to dive into a lot of different things. That being said, we're going to probably skip, for us hosts, that is, skip the 5 words. Usually we start every live show with, describe the last section in 5 words. For us hosts, because we have so much to talk about, we're going to go ahead and skip that. But for you in the comments, please feel free to jump in and give us your 5 words as we start our show here and go into a lot of what we've recently read and what we've read overall. So please feel free to jump in the comments and let us know what your 5 words are. So before we begin into specific questions, the first question that we're really going to dive into, because it is the hot topic right now since we just finished reading, is what did we think about the epilogue? How do we feel about that? Christy, why don't you start us off?
Okay, so for the epilogue, I think it's really needed. I think it's very necessary. I think that's where the main point of the book comes in, which is basically that Raskolnikov cannot be this extraordinary person who does this savior-like generosity all across the Russia. He does say that he wants to spread the wealth, and that's why he initially thinks that he kills whatever her name is, the
pawnbroker.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. And he just really at the end, when he admits his guilt to Porphyry, he hasn't really given up his theory. He just knows that he's not one of these extraordinary people, which means he is subject to moral law. So he hasn't really given up the theory. It really takes the dream that he has at the end about the plague, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to make him realize that, no, this theory will not work. It will bring the world into chaos if everybody believes the extraordinary person does whatever he or she wants theory. And he realizes that only from Sonia can he, receive. He senses that from her he can receive forgiveness because she forgave her father, who is a wretch, and he needs renewal. And he sees that she, even though she's a prostitute, is a very pure person, and that she will not give up love and forgiveness, no matter what he did. And she really comes through. And because of that, in the epilogue, even though he treats her badly for months and she still loves him, I think that's why it's important to see that he comes to her in the end and he has that spiritual renewal. And I think that's what happens. We don't see him as a Christian. That's not, he says that's for another story, but essentially that's what happens. He just realizes he needs the renewal and he needs the forgiveness, and it can't come from him. And Sonia knows where it comes from. And so he's essentially taking her beliefs and making them his own. And that's what happens at the end of the epilogue, which is important.
Yeah, I agree in the sense that what was written in the epilogue was important to the understanding of Raskolnikov's journey. But for me, as a reader, when I get to the epilogue, the story's done. Like, it's over. The last words have been saying. The epilogue's just like that extra thing. So for me, because it was titled the epilogue, I was completely like put off by the fact that they kept going with the story. Like, it didn't end. It was the ending of the story in the epilogue. So for me, I was like, I almost preferred not to read the epilogue, because when at the very end, when he goes to the police station and he's going to confess, and then he like starts to leave, like, oh, I guess I don't have to, and he walks back out and he sees Sonia. The moment that he sees her and he laughs, it's like he's like, oh yeah. And in my head as a reader, my mind, my imagination, from what I have read already, what I understand of Raskolnikov, what I understand of Sonia, what I understand of all of the different themes and pieces of symbolism in the book, my imagination already went to, he's going to confess, he's going to receive his punishment, and he is going to begin his spiritual journey because of that story of Lazarus. So for me, I had already assumed that that was going to happen. And with the epilogue kind of coming in and being like, reader, you're not smart enough to figure this out, so here you go. This is what happens. Like, that was an irritation to me. And I think that's why in the Voxer group, it was brought up a couple of times that a lot of readers have controversy over the epilogue because of that. It's not so much that the material was controversial. It was just that, like, every reader has a different interpretation of what an epilogue should be. That, like, for me, it wasn't that the material in the epilogue was bad or not good part of the story, or, what we're shown isn't great. It was just that, like, I felt like my intelligence and my imagination was kind of being tossed out the window, saying, well, you're not smart enough to figure out that this is the journey that he's going to begin, so I'm going to tell you this. So I was kind of put off by the epilogue, to be honest. Sarah, what did you think?
I feel very similarly to you, Danny. I think that in the story, we very much get the view from Raskolnikov the whole time. You're almost inside his head because you hear his thoughts quite a bit. And then all of a sudden, when they switch to the epilogue, all of a sudden it takes this long view. It's like the camera is pulled back and we're getting a narrator talking instead of Raskolnikov's inner voice. And all of a sudden it takes, a year of time and condenses it. So the entire story before that took maybe a week or maybe a little bit more. And then all of a sudden it's like, and 9 months later, he finally realized that he was a bad guy. The end. It was yeah, exactly, Ange. It needed at least 150 pages, and it needed to be a closer view. What's actually going on inside his head when he picked up that Bible? Like, there was no description of how he comes to this redemption.
Victoria, did you have different thoughts?
I can totally see what you guys are saying about that. I do kind of wish we had like a Raskolnikov part 2 and got to see more. I think for me that would be what's missing. But I do think the epilogue, I'm a little more in Christie's camp. I think the epilogue was a necessary thing to show what Dostoevsky actually wanted to do with the story, and that he did want it to be a redemption kind of story. That wasn't clear to me though until the very last page, so it was jolting. I agree that it felt a little bit like, oh, that was unexpected. I didn't realize that was where we were going with the story. I like that that's where we're going with the story though. Like I like that it is redemptive, and I like that there is hope. And so personally I like that twist on it, but I could also totally see the perspective of like it came out of the blue, because it does feel that way. But I think it's essential to understanding what Dostoevsky is trying to say.
Absolutely. And that really kind of like pushes us right into that whole next part of our discussion, and that is that redemption. Oh, Christy, go ahead.
Martha wants to say something.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, one more thing. Something Porfiry Petrovich over there just said. She was like, we kind of want to see what Radya looks like after this renewal, and also what Radya himself over here said. We want to see inside of his head. I was just reading the bio, and it talked about how that's part of what made Dostoevsky himself kind of unsatisfied with his own prologue. Oh. And what the critics thought is you don't really see that, and he just kind of has to finish it off with a quick little flourish. But in his later works, he does kind of continue to work that out, which makes me really want to continue reading on. But so apparently, I don't know what that means exactly, because I haven't read a ton of his other works. But apparently, he took the criticism to heart and worked it out in other books.
Oh, cool. That's really good to know. I'm very too.
I was excited to read that. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's great. And like I said, I liked what it is. I think it's just because it was called Epilogue. Like, it just really, I don't know why I get so irritated with, like, I get caught on really little things. But the fact that it's called an epilogue, I was just like,
it's a matter of expectations.
There's too much here. Because, I mean, you could sit and talk about the epilogue for days. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot there. And it's this big. It's tiny. So, yeah, like Ange said, like Sarah said, or Radya said, it needed to be longer. It needed to, if you're going to have this 500 some odd page book, and then in 20 pages say, this was my point, and it's the epilogue, it really just didn't sit well with me. I got a splitting headache about it.
Is that the only thing that gave you a splitting headache?
Yeah. I was like, I need to tell that joke. I got to put it in there somewhere. So that was a good spot to start. So as our Porfiry here mentioned, the redemption side of it, what we understand from the epilogue is that this is a book about redemption and religious redemption, it seems. So, how does religious redemption play a role in the novel? And is the novel a religious novel? So that's kind of the next question that we're going to kind of break down. For me, I don't know that I would call this a religious novel completely, because there are so many themes in this book. I don't think it's specifically only religion. I think there's, alienation, there's psychology, there's just so much. There's, commenting on the time, the place. So I don't think it's just religious. I think that's a part of it. And I think it's a big part because of the fact that it's what pushes him and redeems him in the end. And especially Sonia's character is so amazingly virtuous, even though she, has to go into prostitution in order to help her family. She is the most virtuous of all of the characters. And it's because of her commitment to God that she is the way she is. And I think that was very compelling. She was a very compelling character, and I really enjoyed her. For some reason, I was like waiting for like a Charles Dickens kind of character from her, where she was just like, almost like a Miss Havisham, like just really raw and rude. And because she's a prostitute, we're just going to see this. And instead, we get a pretty woman version of of a prostitute, where she's just like, oh, I've got a heart of gold, but I got to do this because. So I loved Sonia. She was one of my favorites. I think what's interesting with religion and its piece in this novel is the fact that from the beginning, even being introduced to Raskolnikov, his name means schism. And we have to ask ourselves, what is this a schism from? Is this just meaning like, the rich from the poor, the rural from the urban? What does that mean? And I think as you get further and further and further into the novel, and especially on that last page, we realize this is that schism between religion or faith, and this, idea of nihilism, this idea of materialism and moving away from the faith of it all, the spiritualism, the Christianity, and moving to this just materialistic kind of gross. I was very turned off by how much that became a huge piece of the novel, and we see that every time he throws money away. He doesn't want anything to do with material things, but he also is like so trepidatious about being a religious person too. And I think we see that a lot when he does speak to especially Porphyry, because they have these very intellectual conversations, and he's so careful about how he says things, not just because he's trying not to get caught, but because he's rational, and he doesn't want to be a victim of being labeled by any means. He wants to be his own person, and he believes a lot of different things, but it's because of him, not because of anybody else. So as we kind of see this, kind of development of him and him meeting these new people, and his empathy towards them, and his trying to give them all of what he has, and especially the scene with Sonia reading the story of Lazarus, the way he mentally breaks down as she is reading this to him, and how she is so moved as she is verbally reading the story. That is, I believe, the climax. Like, that is where we start to see he is starting to get it. His journey is starting to begin. Very, very small push at that time. And then we start to see more actions where he's getting pushed more and more and more. Especially when he confesses. And I know for me, I grew up Catholic, and confession is a big part of that faith, and that is a way to absolve yourself of sin. And I think with him confessing to Sonia, it brings that religious or spiritual aspect of he is looking for forgiveness, he is looking for absolution, and he is looking to God to find himself once again, because he has been so lost in this societal idea of rationality and what is a motive of someone to be a good person. And that's where I think rock bottom when he wrote that article, like, oh, there's only ordinary, oh no, extraordinary people. So I think that religion is huge in the book, but I don't think it's the only thing about the novel, I guess what I would say. Ange brought up a really good point in the Voxer group, which I feel like every time I read a book with a prostitute in it, I'm like, Mary Magdalene. I always think it goes back to her. And I think there's a little bit of credit there. I think there's a little bit of that. I wouldn't say that it's completely, I don't know if it's completely the muse for that, but if you're familiar with Mary Magdalene, it's believed that she was a prostitute, and She was a follower of Jesus Christ, and he, I think she like washed his feet. So there's a lot of parallels there to the story of Mary Magdalene and how we see Sonia and the kissing of the feet and the kneeling in front of her at the end in the epilogue. That to me, I was like, ooh, that's something there. But then still her commitment to God. I know Ange brought up that it's believed that then Mary Magdalene was an apostle then of Jesus Christ. And I have not done enough research to say yay or nay on any of these topics. So again, these are just all ideas and just stirring up of thoughts. So please don't take any of this as, the gospel. No pun intended. But, it really just continues to draw back into this idea of that schism. Religion and nihilism, and they're two entities that are just not having fun together. That was a really long explanation of that, and I'm sorry. Does anyone have any topic or anything to add on that point before we kind of jump into that idea of nihilism?
You covered it really well.
Let's see what we see in the group here. Make sure I didn't miss anything. I know I'm out of breath. But I feel naked without my axe. Oh, there's lots of blood on it.
I can't see the chat from here without my glasses.
Oh, I know. I was thinking
I'm
about not wearing my glasses, but literally I really can't see them that well, so. Okay,
You're all very fuzzy.
It looks like the comments are pretty on point of what we've been kind of talking about, so we'll keep moving. So yeah, that's my 2 cents about religion. So like I said, nihilism is kind of the parallel. Like Ange said a couple discussions ago, we always have those combative things. There's always one then versus the other. So as far as nihilism goes in the novel, what can be said about this now that we've completed our reading? Victoria, do you want to head us off there?
Yeah, so nihilism in the epilogue specifically, since we're talking about the end of the book, what I found really interesting was how even after the physical punishment that he's experiencing, like he's in prison in Siberia, he's still holding on to his nihilism beliefs. And it's interesting that Dostoevsky shows us how like the outward punishments that he gets from his murders are not even really shaking him. Like he's just still accepting them and like, okay, this is what happens. I'm not, I guess I'm just not one of those. I'm not a Napoleon. And then he's still alienating himself like from the other prisoners. It talks about how he's not liked by the other prisoners. He's keeping to himself, and he is rude to Sonia, even though she's followed him all the way to Siberia. He's still not making like emotional connections with people. He's not feeling love. He's not giving love. He's still holding to his nihilistic beliefs, and until something clicks, and that's where I wish we had more internal information about him at the end of like what exactly clicks for him. But I think Dostoevsky's showing him like he's picking up the New Testament, something hits him, and it just clicks for him like, oh, I'm going to be loved. I am loved by people, and now I'm going to reciprocate that love to Sonia. And it talks about how he's kind of on a path to be happy again. And so I thought it was really interesting that Dostoevsky chose to do that his physical punishments, that like the external punishments, are not even enough to shake him, because inside he's still so grasping on to that nihilistic belief. And it shows just like how much it had a hold of him. And then the only thing that can help break him out of that is like Sonia's just devotion to him, and her kind of like showing God's love to him is how I read it. and then it finally breaks him out of it.
I think too, isn't the epilogue one of the only places we actually see the term nihilism, like nihilistic views? I feel like it's the only place because I remember reading it and thinking, hey,
I think I noticed that too.
Yeah, that was surprising to me. So very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
If you word search nihilism, there's very few mentions of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good point.
Mm-hmm. Did anyone else have anything to add in that section on the topic of nihilism? I, for instance, had not ever heard of this term prior to reading. Chrissy, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. Is this specific to Russian literature, or has this been seen in other places that you know of? And it's okay if you don't. I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
I'm afraid I haven't read up on my philosophy. I think Soren Kierkegaard, who is not Russian, I don't know, but he's something else, European.
Mm-hmm.
I think he might have come up with it, but
Okay.
and I'm pretty sure Dostoevsky read him, but I'm sure if you looked at the dates, you could poke holes in my theory right here. That's the very vague idea that I have of it.
Mm-hmm. Ange has a question here. Does this reflect Dostoevsky's own experience and his time in prison?
I mean, we do know that he was in prison in Siberia himself, right?
Mm-hmm. For a similar amount of time, too.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
So with Dostoevsky, there's a lot of similarities between Radia and Dostoevsky. They both grew up in very Christian homes, and both went to St. Petersburg and studied and were very, very poor there. And you know how Radia did some translation work with Razumikin, like before we met him. The timeline of this book is crazy.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of similarities, and then he was imprisoned for his connections with a socialist group and almost executed. So there are a lot of similarities. I think Dostoevsky never lost his faith, but he had to grapple really hard with all of the intellectual currents of his day and his studies because he was brilliant. So he had to reconcile his Orthodox Christianity with all of those things. So slightly different than Radia. It seems like Radia kind of abandoned his belief, if he had a belief, you know, that his mother and sister had. When he came to St. Petersburg, at least, we see that he has developed his own theories and of the extraordinary people versus ordinary people. And that's what gets him sent to prison. So it's slightly different. And then when he goes to Siberia, Radia has a religious awakening. I think Dostoevsky did have a similar awakening in the sense that his faith was renewed. The suffering really helped renew his faith. Suffering was a big thing in Orthodox Christianity, Orthodox Russian Christianity.
I'm sorry, I've got this comment here that's hiding Porphyry right now. I'm sorry.
Oh, Nietzsche.
But we have a Wikipedia. Thank you, Shelley. It says nihilism is
you.
often associated with the German philosopher Nietzsche, who provided a detailed diagnosis of nihilism as a widespread phenomenon of Western culture. So that would make sense if, as St. Petersburg is getting bigger, that materialism would be greater, and then philosophizers, that's a word, begin to talk about it. Absolutely. And then Ange here, I think the problem with nihilism is that it did not believe in the system that gave no alternative. Is that other?
There's some words missing there.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay, Ange.
Add some words, Ange.
It's all good. She's so excited. She's typing so fast.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm
as
typing
we
on my
continue
phone.
the conversation, nihilism has been a. Sarah, were you gonna add something? Oh, okay. I was like, I don't want to talk over anybody. But nihilism being one of the themes or one of the topics, we also kind of talking about the people who then kind of diagnose that, or they talk about that. We also see that's a huge part of the psychology of the book itself, how it's been impacting each of our characters, but also alienation from society is a huge theme of the book, which ties into that psychology and nihilism. Christy, can you give us a little bit of an idea of, you know, where do we see this in the novel? Who do we feel is most impacted by this psychology or, you know, alienation?
Yeah, so there's a lot of psychology in this book, and if we studied all of the psychologies of all the characters, of course, it would be very, very long. We could talk about that for forever. So I'll mostly focus on Radia here. Hang on, let me get to it. I have lots of notes. Dreams. That's later. Sorry.
No, you're okay.
Where is it? Okay, psychology, alienation. Okay, so Raskolnikov first feels alienated from the rest of humanity when he shows up in the police station after doing the murder and then spending 2 days like really delirious, sick in bed. And then he shows up at the police station and he gets treated badly. And, you know, by the very explosive firecracker cop, essentially. And he starts to get really angry about it. And then he's like, I don't even deserve dignity and respect because of what I just did. He is actually horrified, like immediately after like going almost hypnotically through the murder. He's not really thinking. He forgets to lock the door behind him as he's doing the murder. So there's no real thought happening here. He's just playing out everything that he's very badly planned, and the plan doesn't go according to plan at all. And he's horrified by the murder, and then spends the delirium, and then goes to the police station. So at this point, he's still very much processing what happened, and that's kind of happening throughout the book. He slowly makes psychological steps throughout the entire book, and the first step is in that police station when he realizes, I do not deserve respect. I have alienated myself with this one act from the rest of humanity. And there's a lot of other characters that are alienated from everybody else. There's Sophia as a prostitute. Everybody looks badly at her without even understanding why she did what she did or who she is. Marmeladov has alienated himself with his drink. And Dunya and her mother both are alienated when Svidrigailov and Marfia, his wife, blame her for what happened with Svidrigailov. And Marmeladov's wife, when she's the angry drunk wife and she's with all of her kids, and everybody's just like in a ring around her room watching her and laughing as she is pulling Marmeladov's hair. So there's a lot of characters who are kind of reflecting the alienation that Raskolnikov feels, only their reasons for being alienated are all very different than his, and everything that happens to the characters in the books is a reflection of something that's going on internally with Radia. So his psychology is basically, like I said, it's he doesn't know why he did the murder. As he processes the murder throughout the novel, there are various points in time when he'll make a realization, like when he's talking with Luzin about Dunya. And Luzin is like, you know, oh, we don't need to treat other people well. We don't need to worry about other people. We just need to take care of ourselves. That's all that matters. You know, we don't need to give charity to people because it's degrading to them. And Raskolnikov just takes all of Luzin's theories and he's like, well, if you take your theories to the extreme, like I did, you know, he doesn't add that, you could just kill all the useless people and that would make you better off, you know? So that theory doesn't work if you take it to the extreme. And that's like one of his realization points, that his theory of just getting rid of the useless people to help everybody else, that doesn't work with morality. It's not a moral, it's not a moral act. It's not a humanitarian act. It doesn't help anybody. It's just a very selfish thing to do. And I had some other notes. There was one really interesting quote that Razumikin talked about Radia. Who was he talking to? I think he was talking to Dunya and Radia's mother. And he says, Radia is morose, gloomy, proud, and haughty. And of late, and perhaps for a long time before, he has been suspicious and fanciful. He has a noble nature and a kind heart. He does not like showing his feelings and would rather do a cruel thing than open his heart freely. Sometimes, though, he is not at all morbid, but simply cold and inhumanly callous. It's as though he were alternating between two characters. Sometimes he is fearfully reserved. He says he is so busy that everything is a hindrance, and yet he lies in bed doing nothing. He doesn't jeer at things, not because he hasn't the wit, but as though he hadn't time to waste on such trifles. He never listens to what is said to him. He is never interested in what interests other people at any given moment. He thinks very highly of himself, and perhaps he is right. Well, what more? I think your arrival will have a most beneficial influence on him. So, sorry this is so long. I'm almost done. Svidrigailov also describes Radia and Dunya very similarly. You're both melancholy, both morose and hot-tempered, both haughty and both generous. So Dunya is almost like the good half of Radia. And according to Dostoevsky in his bio, he had a lot of trouble taking this very conflicted character of Radia, the conflicted intellectual who's trying to live out his theories, even though everything in him rebels against it. He's like, how could I make this guy realistically admit his guilt? Like, how would that even happen? He had a lot of trouble figuring that out. And Sonia was the only way that he could figure out how to do it, because Sonia was obviously, if she would pity her father, Marmeladov, and love him anyway, Radia, when he realizes that he needs forgiveness and renewal, she's the only one that he figures would give it to him. So that Sonia was the only way that Radia, in his crazy mental state, could potentially decide to admit his own guilt. And Porphyry was obviously instrumental in that as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and several people in the chat, in the Voxer chat, mentioned early on, very early, that Radia seemed like two different people. Mm-hmm. And that is echoed through everything that I've read about this novel. Mm-hmm. Dostoevsky wanted like a new side of Radia to emerge after the murder. Mm-hmm. And it was things that Radia didn't expect to emerge about himself. Mm-hmm. And Dostoevsky actually used the term demonic at one point in his notes. So, yeah. That's about all I have. It was a little bit disorganized. I'm sorry about that.
No,
it was a lot.
Well, I think you bring up a lot of great points, specifically with Svidrigailov and his, role in a lot of kind of alienating certain people. Like, he was kind of the catalyst of, Dunya's kind of almost demise, I guess you could say. So it's interesting to see the juxtaposition between him and Raskolnikov, and how, their stories kind of mingle a little bit, and how when he talks to, Raskolnikov, he kind of says, we're two of the same people, like, we're the same. And Roddy is very turned off by that. He's like, I am nothing like you. And I think that kind of makes him start down his path of redemption too, because he's like, wait a second, you're a crazy person. I'm just doing what I can to be helpful. So I think kind of bridging that topic into our next topic, which is the significance of the fact that Svidrigailov, he commits suicide. I mean, sorry if you haven't finished the book, but it happens. So what's the significance of that? what if their character arcs had been crisscrossed? What if, Raskolnikov was the one that, ended up committing suicide, and Svidrigailov was the one that was redeemed? Sarah, can you talk a little bit on that? And as you do that, I'm going to actually, my computer's dying, so I'm going to go grab my plug, but please take it off, and then, no, don't take anything off, but, get us through that.
Sure. So it's interesting, like he had such a reaction in saying, no, I'm not like you at all. But I think that they are alike in some very important ways. They are both, so basically Svidrigailov, his reasons for committing his crimes are different. His idea is he just wants to have the maximum happiness and enjoyment for himself, whereas Raskolnikov thinks that he is increasing the joy of the entire world by committing this murder. But in the end, they both basically do the same thing. They both brutally murder somebody. So it's interesting that they're both, in a way, I think you can say that by killing himself, Svidrigailov did get a little bit of redemption, realizing that he was not doing any good to anybody and taking himself out of the equation. But he did not get that spiritual redemption that Raskolnikov gets. So he does. Actually, it's interesting. I just thought of this. Svidrigailov actually increases the happiness of the entire world by taking himself out. So maybe that's another way that they are similar. But it's interesting. So Raskolnikov doesn't, because he doesn't die, he does have this chance for the spiritual redemption, and Svidrigailov never did get that. But they are both bad people, bad people. And Raskolnikov spends all his time thinking that he's a good guy, and he's not. I think we all feel that way.
You seem really animate about it, though.
I have like a personal beef with Raskolnikov because he thinks that he's doing a good one for everybody. He thinks he's doing the world solid, and like he's not. But well, yeah, we can talk about that later. That's coming up.
No, I completely agree. I think we see that even when he confesses. Sonia even has to remind him, because I think he goes, who, that louse? I think he like calls her names. Like he's upset about Lizveta. I mean, look at this face. He killed this beautiful woman. And yet I don't think he ever really gives two stones that he killed the pawnbroker at all. I don't think he ever does. I think he wants redemption, but I don't think, like you said, Sarah, I think he thinks he did a good thing by doing that.
Even by the end?
I just, it's so hard. I'd have to reread it and literally find the exact words where it says, I feel bad for that. And I don't feel like it was there. I don't feel like at any time he was like, that was probably not a good decision. I don't know. I think what I'll end up doing is rereading the epilogue, because that is the one thing, and I think, Sarah, that's probably why you might be as, into it as you are, is that I don't feel like he ever actually thinks that the pawnbroker was a mistake. Like, I think he still feels like that was like, okay. I don't know. I'll have to reread it. And try to figure that out, because I didn't get that impression.
Yeah, and when I get to my next question, I'll talk a little bit more about it too.
Okay. Any other comments on that particular topic?
I think you guys are partially right about his journey. It's like right up until the end of the epilogue that he still thinks he believes in his theory right up until the end. So we don't really see the rejuvenated Raskolnikov. We see just the very seed of that. He has not. He's starting to repent, when he's very upset and just like grabs Sonya's knees and cries. That's just the very beginning. So we don't really see his rejuvenation. So you guys are right, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good redemption. Doesn't happen overnight. You can't do something as horrible as you did and be absolved in an instant. So I like that aspect. I like that the story ended. I believe the words are like, that's a story for another day, or whatever. It could, he's putting the reader in a place of saying, like, this is just the beginning. Like, he has a long way to go. Like, and I agree with that. I think a very dear friend of mine who is a professor to me, reason why I continued in English, when we were reading like classical medieval literature, that kind of stuff, it's and Dante, Dante's Inferno, all those, Catholics really believed or whatever, that you just say you're sorry before you die and then you'll go to heaven. And my friend Beth Ann and I always laugh. We're just like, at the end of every day, just go, I'm sorry. And, like, you'll be free. And that's just, to me, I don't think that works that way. Because you also cannot get away with it because you're going to say you're sorry. So you don't actually mean it. So, Christy, I see your hand.
Yes. I know that at least some Catholics believe in purgatory, so you may be saved, but you might go to purgatory for a super long time before you get to heaven. You don't go straight to heaven. And I know even like Church of England and there's other denominations even of Christianity that believe that.
Yeah. So I like the fact that he is acknowledging the fact that this is a journey and it's not just the end of the book and now he feels redeemed. He's good to go. He's saved. So I did like that aspect. But that kind of, purgatory or even, what we see with him in Siberia, that really brings up this topic of punishment. So, what is the punishment in the novel? Are there multiple punishments? What do we see in that? Victoria, you have this topic. You want to tell us a little bit about punishment in the novel?
Sure. So there's the ultimate punishment, right? Of like his actual trial and being in prison. So that's like the macrocosm of his actions causing him to go to prison. And then that's really not the punishment that affects him the most, though. It seems like it barely affects him at all, and he just kind of goes with it. So the real punishments for him are internal, they're mental, they're spiritual, to the point where he even experiences physical symptoms. I'm sorry, my dog is there. My dog is being needy right now.
Porphyry probably has a dog.
Yeah, it's a canine police dog.
Yeah.
But yeah, his real punishments are almost self-induced. He has guilt, but he pushes it down because of his beliefs that he's trying to hold to. I think what you see throughout the novel is him feeling guilty, but never admitting that he feels guilt. And it even causes him to like go into cold sweats. That's something the movie version I thought did a good job of showing, like, that he's having physical reactions to what's going on inside. Which, if anyone who has experience with anxiety, things like that, they know that that's a real thing. That's a real problem. So, his real punishments, I think, are internal and spiritual.
Absolutely. I absolutely think that, because even as we see his punishments, they're kind of like just overcast, and then you get into the spiritual or the psychological, and they're like pages long of how horrible, he feels, or, the illness and everything. And that, I think, is part of the punishment as well, because he's punishing himself. So absolutely. And it's interesting that that's the title. Has anyone thought about this, like Crime and Punishment, as the title of this novel itself? Like how, because anytime you go into a book and you think about the title usually impacts your view of the book. What does it mean? Or if you find it in the book, you're like, oh, there it is. That's why they named it this, whatever. Mm-hmm. But as it is Crime and Punishment, as a reader, I think you're looking for the crime, and then you look for the punishment. What's the punishment going to be for whatever crime has happened, right? And that can be interpreted however we'd like.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know we were talking about alienation a little bit, or we're going, I forget if someone has.
We did.
Oh yeah, we talked about alienation, and I think that's another punishment of he's alienated from his mom and his sister, in that they do love him, but he doesn't see it, and he alienates himself from them. He's alienated from Sonia until the very, very end. He just holds himself back from relationships with other people, and from experiencing emotion, and from giving love and receiving love. And that seems to me to almost be the ultimate punishment, is that he can't feel love and he can't give love, and he alienates himself. He punishes himself, basically. he does it to himself.
I think a lot of our characters have, like, there's several arcs with crime and punishment. If you think, like, there's the big one with Raskolnikov, but there's also like Marmeladov, who his crime is being a drunk, and his punishment is the life that he lives now. Svidrigailov, whose crimes were many, and now he's haunted by his dead wife, and ultimately can't be with the woman that he wants and kills himself. There's the pawnbroker, whose crime was basically robbing people, and now she's been axed to death. I think there's a lot. I think if you go through the characters one by one, you could almost come up with a crime for every single one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially if you think about what is a crime and what makes a crime, and we'll kind of jump into that in a little bit. But more so too, as we're thinking about crimes and punishments and what that means, it's all an interpretation, and we see a lot of interpreting throughout the novel. And it seems like every time, it seems almost as if before each crime is committed, there's some dream sequence that we see. And we interpret that in a certain way depending on how that kind of moves forward. So our next question kind of goes along in that same vein of, those dreams, and what the significance of the dreams are. Because if we remember early on, we had the dream with the mayor, and then not the mayor, the mayor. And then we have these dreams that we see from Svidrigailov, which I was more creeped out by the little girl in his dream than I was with the mayor. And I think it's because like that part had gotten out of my head at that point. But then like thinking about that little girl, I was just like, oh my gosh.
That part was
what do we think about that, Christy?
Of the little girl dream?
Just the dreams in general. Yeah.
Dreams in general. So this is a really big question, and I'm afraid I didn't study up well enough to answer dreams as a whole in the novel. Again, although that's a really interesting one, and I would love to study that one more, with Svidrigailov, because clearly he has Svidrigailov is really interesting, and he's kind of hard to understand. I just haven't read it enough, to kind of understand what's going on there. But clearly he's struggling with some demons, I think metaphorically. And the way he handles it, he's like a subplot character, or I think Victoria once used the term foil to Radia, because they're both facing a very similar problem and they both choose very different outcomes. And all the women in Radia's life were really afraid that he would choose the same outcome as Svidrigailov and commit suicide. But he didn't. He decided to take his suffering and admit his guilt before the world, which Svidrigailov decided not to do. Yeah, exactly. So as far as Radia's dreams, which is what I took the time to study in this particular case, Dostoevsky believed that dreams were prophetic in his own life. When he had dreams, he believed they were prophetic. So I think that is why he gives Raskolnikov several dreams throughout the story. They're almost like explaining his own. The biography called it moral emotive psyche. So they're usually a response of his conscience to his ideas. So in like the mare dream, there's a couple different Radyas. There's the young Radya who's horrified. There's the Radya who is killing the mare, the useless old mare, which I think Danny mentioned early on that's probably the pawnbroker. Although there's lots of layers to that dream, I think. That's the main one. And then there's Radya who comes out of the dream and is immediately like, "Oh, well, I'm glad that's over. You know, I'm over it. I don't need to do that anymore because that was horrible." And then he plans to do it anyway and then does it when he sees it's like his life tells him what to do at various points. When he hears the coincidence in the streets that Lizaveta is going to be gone at this particular hour of this particular day, and he realizes that's the hour that I can go kill the pawnbroker. He's like, and he overhears the people in the tavern talking. He feels like it's like the universe telling him, okay, this is your chance. It's all set up for you. Go do it. And so even though his dreams are like, don't do it, he goes and does it. And then I think the most important dream is the plague that sweeps across Asia and Europe, which happens in the epilogue. This plague it's supposed to stand for his belief that there are extraordinary people who can kill whomever gets in their way, the useless people, for the good of the rest of the people. And he realizes in this dream, I should have pulled a quote, but I didn't, that if everybody did that, the world would be a mess. There would be no social or moral norms. Society would fall apart. And yeah, nobody would feel like they need to follow any sort of morality. They wouldn't recognize evil. They would be just like him. They would be tormented and doing bad things, but not being able to tell why they're bad and why they feel so bad for doing them. And so that's really what the dream symbolizes, at least according to the biography. Initially, when I read it, I was like, it's nihilism. But I think it's very specifically there's like nihilism, I think, is a broader term. And then there's particular beliefs that fall under that umbrella. And he tackles utilitarianism a lot in this story. So egoism is part of utilitarianism. It's where you believe that self-interest is the actual motive of all conscious action, and self-interest is the valid end of all actions. So if everybody believes that and acts that way, the world will be a mess. And that's really what kind of prompts him on to his spiritual revelation in the epilogue. And that's why he realizes, I need Sonia. And that's as far as we see. I need Sonia. There's something she has that I need.
Right. It's like it's almost as if Sonia is like his constant, the one thing that is tethering him to the world, because without her, he would be lost. I think that a lot of his beliefs or a lot of his spirituality would be gone. I think he'd be in a different place if Sonia wasn't there. And a lot of what you were kind of going through with that illness or pandemic, kind of cutting out, how it being chaos. It really reminds me of a quote by Gandhi. An eye for an eye makes the whole world go blind. I think that's very true in a lot of cases that we've seen throughout history. When people react to violence with violence, it doesn't do anything. It literally just circulates and circulates and circulates, and it doesn't actually accomplish anything. Because you're just removing one piece of it instead of changing it. You're just getting rid of something, and when you remove that one thing, someone else is just going to come right back and continue. So I think it's interesting how a lot of real people in our history, this is a constant. It's a constant. You know, we see this with Gandhi. We saw this with Martin Luther King Jr. We see that you can't keep fighting. You have to change the idea. It's the idea. It's not just, you made me mad, I'm going to punch you in the face. Oh, now you're going to punch me in the face. We're just going to keep, it's going nowhere. So I like that idea that journey is to begin to change from the inside out. Very nice. Very, very nice.
Thank you.
That was so smart. So, Sarah, you had brought up a few of these things as well, and this kind of goes back to our topic of punishment, and you had brought up, how punishment and the crime kind of go together. Oh, I'm sorry, Christy.
Nope, my hair is coming undone.
But with the crimes, and you had mentioned quite a few of them, but it seems like, obviously we have the crime of murder, we have the crime of prostitution, which, I mean, to us, because prostitution is illegal here, there they have the yellow card, so technically, but I mean, it's a crime against your own body, I guess, is my interpretation of that. There's theft, there's, he takes out loans, or he owes money. That's a criminal act. He gets called to the police station for that. There's assault, there's poverty. I feel like poverty is a crime, because it's like a national crime. You're allowing your people to live in poverty. I think that's a crime against your people. So is starvation. I mean, these kids are starving. Illness, alcoholism, neglect, all of these things to me were crimes in the novel. So when we think about the word crime in the title, like what crime is that referring to? I think it's twofold. I think you could sit there. I mean, it's probably manyfold. You could say it's all the crimes. It's every crime within the novel. You could say it's the original crime, the axe murdering. But I think, as we have discussed the novel, I think it's the overarching theme of this crime against yourself, of being removed from your spiritual self and moving towards this materialistic, nihilistic kind of view of this doesn't matter anymore, that this is all that matters. And what we see is this is being represented in this St. Petersburg as all these crimes, this starvation, alienation, assault, poverty, prostitution, filth, like just all of these things. I think it's just it's like that smack dab. It's you've removed yourself from your true path, and this is your punishment. All of this is your punishment. So that was my interpretation once I really sat down and I was thinking about, like, why name this book this title? And Ange brought it up too, that it was going to be called The Drunkards, which makes sense to a very small degree. Yes, there are, Sonia's father is a drunk. We get that. And he basically ruined his family because of it. But there's bar scenes and stuff, but I don't feel like that was a big impactful piece of the novel. I feel like the title that he chose ultimately, perfect, because it covered everything. Which then, finally brings us to our final, real, diving into the novel question. And that's, toward the end, and we kind of touched on this here and there. Do we think that Raskolnikov really still believes in this ordinary versus extraordinary? Is this still something that he feels? Is this still his, idea of the world? Sarah, do you want to kind of end our discussion of the book there?
Yeah, sure. So before the opening of the book, before we meet him, is when he comes up with this idea of the extraordinary man. And by the time the book opens, he's very deep into believing this. I think he has his moments where he has some doubt about it, like when he kind of hesitates in whether he's going to go through with his crime, or his, I guess he doesn't think of it as a crime at the time, but then he does end up deciding on it. And he, throughout most of the book, he still very strongly believes in his theory. But he starts to come to realize that, yes, there are extraordinary men. Napoleon was one of them, but oh crap, it turns out I'm not extraordinary. It turns out I did the thing that the extraordinary man would do, but I'm not doing it right. I'm not actually extraordinary. And I think that when he confesses and he goes through his trial and all of that, he's admitting that he's not an extraordinary man, and it's really hard on him to admit that, but he still 100% believes in his theory that there is an extraordinary person out there who would have done it right. And I think he only feels guilty that he got it wrong. Like you were saying, he never, in the whole book, he never says, man, I feel bad about those ladies. Like, he maybe feels the tiniest passing thought about the dumb one. Sorry, the dumb one. But he definitely never, ever feels bad about killing the pawnbroker at all. Never. Never once. Even like, does he have a recollection of the crime and think like, oh, her dead body, which I think most people would be thinking about reliving it. No, he's just worried about getting caught, really. And then it's not until his time in prison, when he's been in prison for quite some time, that he starts to change his mind. And I think in the very end, when he, I love what Christy was saying about basically his redemption. He realizes that his morality, everybody having their own morality with that dream, isn't going to work. What is the true morality? And that's when he turns to his New Testament. But I don't think it's until that very last couple of pages of the book that he realizes, oh crap, my theory was wrong. But it's funny, and this is part of the problem that I have with the ending. Sorry to bring this back up, but it never explains why he changed his mind. There's some hints of it, but there's like not really any factor that flips the switch. Like, what is it about being in this prison that finally flipped the switch? If anything, I would have thought it would come when he finally confessed to the crime, or I guess he just finally realizes, he finally gets broken down, realizes that Sonia loves him. And when he feels love for the first time, then he starts, like, her love, God's love, he kind of feels it then. But I didn't think that part was explained well, but.
Yeah, I don't know if it was explained, like it wasn't like a tell me kind of situation. I think it was more of a show me. I think when he's sitting there, is it like he's sitting at the edge of a lake or something, and he's looking across the lake, and I think he's looking at what civilization is across the lake. and I could be there, but because of what I've done, I'm here, and I'm sitting here, and I'm by myself, and nobody likes me, and I did this terrible thing, and all of a sudden Sonia comes out of nowhere, and at that point I was like, oh my gosh, did she die now? She's like a ghost, and this is like, you know, him understanding that now she's an angel, and she's going to explain all these things. But when she sat down and it was like her presence was so profound because he was in the middle of this thought, staring across the lake, that was the moment in that show me sense, not so much a tell me sense, meaning the author's not going to tell you that in that moment he figured it out. It's more like we as a reader figured it out by what we saw. That when she sat down him, that's when he broke down, knelt, kissed her feet, you know, all that. And I think that was what Dostoevsky was meaning for us to understand there. But I'm with you, Sarah. I don't believe that he's ever sorry. Christy.
As far as him being sorry, I think he was really horrified by what he did very early on. He never exactly says sorry because like we've talked about, he hasn't really rejuvenated yet until the very end. He's just baby steps starting it. But he was horrified, so I think he will be sorry, but he's maybe not until the very end when he realizes his theory sucks. And so when you were talking about that section by the riverbank, Danny, I love that section because and you were talking about alienation. So he's sitting there and he's seeing society and he's feeling alienated. So I think in this book and in a lot of literature in general, nature symbolizes healing. So being alienated to these very rural parts of Siberia, where it's just like him and nature, he is alienated, but that's how his healing will come. I think it's a symbolism thing. Mm-hmm. And when he's sitting there, and I think that's exactly what happens. He's sitting there at the beautiful riverbank, and he says he could just see like black specks, the nomads' tents. There was freedom. There, other men were living, utterly unlike those here. There, time itself seemed to stand still, as though the age of Abraham and his flocks had not passed. And it talks somewhere in here, it may have been in the bio, it talks about how that was a time of very simple faith. And I think it just kind of brings him to the realization that he's overcomplicating things a lot. You know, if the nomads in Abraham's time could have this faith, it's something that he can grasp as well. And then like right after that comes the scene with Sonia. So I think that little daydream of his is kind of important to the themes that you were just talking about.
Right. Any other thoughts regarding the book itself? So we have a couple more questions regarding a few topics, but anything that we've already discussed that we want to get our last little bits in and then kind of move into our next topic.
Well, just on that last question, you guys covered it really well, but I was just going to echo that that dream at the end of the disease, the mass disease, and everybody kind of thinking they are extraordinary. I think that was a big turning point for him, as far as like, I'm not as special as I thought. I'm the same as everyone else. And I saw that as the beginning of his steps towards redemption, just the realization of like the humbling of himself and going, I'm not any more superior than anyone else. And I know we were talking about dreams. I found that dream to be just the most symbolic, as far as maybe the beginning of his steps towards realization of that he's not elevated above everyone else. Like he needs redemption as much as anyone else.
And I know too, Ange brought this up earlier in the chat, but she said, do you think that he now thinks God is the extraordinary man? And I did get a feeling of that, because earlier when that is first brought up, he is so interested in Porphyry's take on it, and he tries to correct Porphyry throughout the entire conversation and stating like, well, I don't think that. It's just something that could be. And I think towards the end of the epilogue, like you said, in his dream, he's realizing like he did very much believe that. He very much did believe that he was an extraordinary person and he could do whatever he thought was right because he's extraordinary and everyone else is ordinary. And how dare they believe that anything that he would do wouldn't be right because he is doing it for the right of the people. And he did what he did to the pawnbroker because everyone wanted it to happen, and he just listened to what everybody wanted and he did it. And the fact of the matter is you're ordinary. Everybody's ordinary, but people do extraordinary things. We're all the same, but we have potential to do good, and we have potential to do wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the extraordinary piece comes in. And to be quite honest, Radya, I think Sonia was extraordinary. I think the fact that she put all of her family's burdens onto her shoulders and still had commitment and faith to God and still stood by his side to help him through this journey of redemption. I mean, she did not have to do that. I mean, she did not. So if you're going to have this theory of extraordinary versus ordinary, I think you have to redefine what does extraordinary mean. And I truly believe it's ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So I absolutely agree with you, Victoria, on that. I think that was the one dream that he really was like, oh, these might have something, some kind of real, yeah. Maybe I should have listened to that mayor one and not killed that one. So absolutely. Okay, so the book is the book, right? And since it's, publication in 18 something.
Oh, I should know this, but I don't.
It's
61, I think.
86, 88.
I think it's 61.
1866.
66.
Since then, we've had numerous adaptations, and I know from reading in our Voxer chat that the 1970 version from BBC is not that good, which was hilarious to read. So thank you, Dippity Whippity, in our Voxer group. That was hilarious.
It was.
For us here in our group, for those of us who did watch the adaptation, or have watched an adaptation, and you in the comments as well, for those of us who have had any kind of adaptation, what are our thoughts about the adaptation? And when you refer, just let us know which one you've seen. Christy, do you want to start?
Sure. Oh, Victoria, was it 2008? Was that what it was?
It was either I thought it was 2008 or 2012, something like that.
Okay, it's the BBC one with 2 episodes that's on Prime. We'll just say that. And it has Palpatine in it. And he is the best part. He is Porphyry. And even though he's not like rotund and kind of almost goofy or silly the way Porphyry is, he is excellent. Like, it's worth seeing just for that. It's also very mood heavy, and I love the mood. I think they got the mood spot on. It has a really kind of blurry camera action, which bothered a lot of people. I think it was really appropriate for the movie, although it bothered a lot of people. So it's kind of like a pro and con. If that kind of thing makes you dizzy or vomit like Danny, then maybe reconsider. But if you don't mind that blurry camera, I honestly didn't even notice until you guys pointed it out. And I was like, oh, that's true. So I think there are some weaknesses to it, but there's a lot of strengths as well. They get the visuals really well done, in my opinion. What else was good about it? I don't remember, but the dialogue was a little bit lacking, and there were some awkward scenes where they're trying to kind of show what's in Radya's head, and that's hard to do because a lot of it is just kind of explained to us in the novel. So there's some awkwardness there, but overall I think it was a good adaptation if you read the novel a little while ago and you want a refresher. If you've just read the novel, there will be some glaring inconsistencies that might bother you. If you've never read the novel, it might not make sense. But if you read the novel a while ago and you just want to have a fun little refresher next Halloween, say, then I say give it a go. I really enjoyed it the first time I watched it, which was before this reread, just shortly before.
So I watched the same one. I watched the same adaptation, and I watched the first episode. And I could not watch the second part, and solely because of the camera work. And the thing is I completely understood the camera work when it completely spoke to me as the sense that it was chaotic. It was definitely like his internal, battles with everything that was happening. Like, the camera work made sense. But for me as a viewer watching it, it just was making me sick. Like, I really could not. Every time, like, it would just like it'd be weird. It would blur out and then come in, and then when the horses, and I was like, no, I can't do it. That removed, when the scenes were actually like pieces of it, like this setting, the actual stage setup, I was like, this is exactly what I assumed this looked like how small things were, and like the kids up in the rafters, like their legs hanging down in Mardolotov's home, and the grody, nasty streets. And I did not appreciate two scenes in the first one. I did not appreciate how when he was murdering Lisbetta, she like lifts her dress up. I did not appreciate that. I thought that's not in the book, and I feel like I think that's a little bit of too much directors assuming a woman would just try to give her that really irritated me. I don't know why. And then I didn't like that they showed Sonia with a customer. I didn't like that either. I was like, we know what she does, okay? We don't have to humiliate her anymore than before. Like, that's one thing that I didn't like about the novel, is that he didn't go into detail about what she does. We know what she does, okay? We don't need to see it. So those two things really irritated me. And then the camera work, I couldn't get into the other one. But I would say, as a whole, like, it was good. I could not relate to Raskolnikov in the adaptation, especially in the cafe scene where he basically confesses. I mean, that was a confession. Oh, I'm just kidding, though. You really believe me? That was too blatant. Yeah. Like, in the book, he was way more ambiguous, way more, like, vague, where the guy's like, I don't know if is he in the movie or the adaptation? I feel like he was just like, I did it. Just kidding. Mm-hmm. You really thought I did it, didn't you? I feel like he confessed there. It was weird. But anywho, that was my 2 cents. I couldn't move forward just because of the camera work. It was just really making me ill, and it was unfortunate because I feel like from what I did see, it was a good adaptation. I think it was pretty close to the book. That's all I have to say about it. Oh, Shelley says the second episode was so much better. Well, maybe I'll get to it.
I echo a lot of those same thoughts, Danny. Yeah, there are definitely some unnecessary scenes in there, and Christy and I were watching it at the same time, and we were like groaning at the dialogue sometimes because I think at one point, like Radia says the word stuff, and I was like, oh, you wouldn't say stuff in Dostoevsky, like that's silly. And my only other beef with it, I liked the whole like claustrophobic feel of the movie. I thought that what really helped to show like the grim poverty of it and everything. But I have a beef with the epilogue or the ending because they left it more open ended. I felt than it actually is in the book. So that was a clear choice that they made. So yeah, I didn't like how they ended it either. If you watched the second half.
Same. They like sanitized it of anything meaningful.
Yeah.
I might watch it. I think maybe I'm gonna have to like watch it with the lights on and like because I was like just laying in bed and our TV in our room is like kind of I'm looking up at it, so maybe it was just like the direction that but maybe if I have it where it's farther in front of me, I was really getting sick. I was like, I can't watch this. This is like really, I was getting ill. Like,
yeah.
So,
But,
okay.
Sarah, were you able to watch the adaptation or no? That's okay.
I basically live in Siberia, so I couldn't get it. I think there was an option to like pay for it, but I have one of those husbands who doesn't believe in paying for movies.
Relatable.
Yeah, I get that. Okay. Well, as far as the book as a whole, like, what's everyone's rating of the book? Now, Goodreads does a rating scale of 5. I don't know. Does everyone do like a Goodreads 5, or how do you guys rate books?
I do the American school system scale of A through F.
Okay. Okay. So, Christy, if you were to rate this book, what is your grade?
A plus 100,000%.
I kind of thought that. So I do the Goodreads. Rating. So 1 to 5.
Should I take out my earphones? No,
I think you might. Yeah, no. I think I'm gonna give this a 4. A solid 4. And really because I think that the book part was too long. There's like whole portions of the book that I feel it might have been unnecessary. And I think that happens a lot with classic novels that were serialized first because of the way that they were writing it. It almost seems as if there were portions where like, oh, that probably didn't have to be in there. And sometimes they omit those once they go to actual publication. But there's parts that I feel could have been omitted. And I feel like there's parts that, like, whatever happened to Lucian? Where did he go? He just disappeared? Like, he just was like, fine, you don't want me, goodbye. Like, where's his punishment? Like, because I think he should have been punished in some way.
He did get socially...
He was kind of a jerk.
He did get socially embarrassed, but...
What's that? Yeah, he was embarrassed. But I feel like, too, like, the epilogue should have been, like, part 7. And then been fleshed out a little bit more. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a solid 4. I think it's good. I think it's a good read, but I'm gonna give it a 4.
It left you wanting more.
Yeah, I think so. Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I think I would also go with a 4. I think there are some things that it was weird to me that there's all these characters that come together very strangely. Like it's not organic. The way Svidrigaïlov just shows up and Raskolnikov's never even met him, and all of a sudden he shows up and he's like, "Hi!" Like there's just some things that that are a bit awkward. I love most of it. It's funny how you were just saying about how it was serialized. I didn't even realize that. So it totally makes sense. This is what happened. The editor was saying, okay, we're going to do 12 12 of them. And then, so Dostoevsky went and he wrote like the first 6. And then they're like, lied, we're only doing 7. So you have to fit all that stuff that you were going to put in the last 6 into this one part. So I think, yeah, the epilogue really took a lot out for me. Knocked it down a whole star.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know, I agree. It's an epilogue. Like I could totally forgive the novel for like having a few things where I was like, nah, if that wasn't an epilogue. If it was a part, probably 5 stars
if
for
they
me.
made it bigger, if they made it more internal and less external, and actually just followed him instead of just saying, and then he found God.
Keeping
Poor
in
Sarah.
mind that this was centuries ago.
Yeah.
that was a
Yeah.
bit more original then.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot though. What happens is when we read a classic, like this just happened to me when I read Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express, because she is the original creator of this whole, that Perot kind of bring everybody to the same room and tell them everything. Because I have read it so far afterwards, I'm like, this has been done before. And it's like, I have to remember in my head, when she was writing this, it wasn't done before. This was new. So I think, Christy, to your point, when he was writing this, it was sensational. It was wow. Who would have thought? I mean, so when we're criticizing it as critics, we have to remember that we have an entire plethora of more literature that has come since this book was published that has, influenced our way of reading a book, understanding the time frame, all of those things. And that impacts our interpretation. And unfortunately, sometimes, and I think especially as we recommend books to other people, we forget about that. And we go, oh, it was done. It's been done before a million times. I've seen it all before. And it's like, yeah, but this was the first time that's ever happened. What you need to do is you need to get a timeline and you need to put on what you're saying and say, oh, well, this is the first time that ever was introduced into a novel. So don't worry, Christy, I have you back.
Thank you, Denny.
But Sarah, valid point. Everyone's points are valid.
So what I'm hearing is we wanted Crime and Punishment to be even longer.
Yeah.
A little bit. A little bit. Victoria, what about you? What was your rating?
I'm just sitting here thinking this is so funny because I'm almost the opposite of you guys. Like it would have been a 3 for me, but then the epilogue made it a 4, which I think is hilarious.
Same.
You guys are saying the opposite, but for me, the epilogue really ties it together. And without the epilogue, the story is just so grim and hopeless. And for most of the book, I was just like, this is dark. Like I don't think I'm gonna read this again. It's really sad and grim. And then by the end, I was like, oh, I get it. I see what he's doing here. And it's one of those books that I would love to reread again. And I'm sure I would catch like so much more symbolism and philosophy and all the, philosophical rants that all the characters go on. Like the things that bogged me down on the first read, I'm sure would provide more insight on a second read. And so it's one of those books that I'm like, I really look forward to revisiting this because I know there's so much to catch, and I'm sure it'll just like make the experience more, like much more rich. So I'm at a 4. There goes my mustache.
Okay. So I mean, still in the upper ranges of ratings. How about, would you guys recommend this to another person? Would you recommend this book to others for reading?
certain people, maybe not everyone. Certain people would get something
Yeah.
out of it. I think certain people would hate it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Like, I wouldn't really recommend this to many people because if you are going, like, I feel like there's different kind of readers out there. This is going to sound so rude, but there are common readers, just people who they're reading for pleasure. You just want to read a book. You want it to give you something, whether that be a horror, a comedy, a romance. You just want to read it, feel good, put it back, and read something else. And then there's people like us who create whole read-alongs to dissect every single word that this author has provided to us. So I feel like if I were to recommend this book, it would be to someone like me, who wants to see symbolism and wants to see themes and wants to, discuss the book with somebody else. I would not recommend this to someone who's just looking for something good to read. Like, when people ask, what are you reading right now? I'm like, oh, Crime and Punishment. Oh, what's that about? Oh, it's about this guy who kills 2 people. Oh, that sounds really good. No, it doesn't. You don't get it. He kills those people in the first 60 pages, and then the next 500 pages is him finding himself. They're like, oh, okay. Yeah, that probably is not my jam.
Totally.
I think the kind of reader that I missed your question. Was it who would you recommend it to, or would you at all? Was that what your question was?
No, just would you recommend to others?
Oh, would I recommend? Okay, I would probably recommend it to the kind of person who really wants to see their ideas and emotions kind of not theirs, the characters being a fusion of idea and emotion. Like, it's kind of like on a spectrum of books that have characters who are just ideas, and it's all like Atlas Shrugged. It's all very much just objectivism, and it's spelling out what objectivism is. And then there's books that really are just for fun. And A Crime and Punishment is very much it's closer to the Atlas Shrugged end of the spectrum than regular genre fiction. But it's also a very emotional read, and I think that's kind of rare for me. A lot of times when I'm reading literary fiction, I don't often get really excited about it because I usually don't agree with the ideas. But I think that's part of Dostoevsky's genius, is his fusion of ideas and feelings into his characters. And so I would look for a reader who is interested in those kind of really deeper ideas and who thinks that fiction can provide them, which is not every reader.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, I'm so long-winded, guys.
No.
I was probably
We've
37
all been
minutes.
long-winded in this chat, which has been awesome. Sarah, did you have any last comments on recommendation?
Yeah, I'd like to see a different translation of this book. So if you think about the translations of the Bible, we have the New King James Version, we have the NSRV, blah, 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 and then we have the Message, which is very modern type of translation. I'd love to see Crime and Punishment in a super modern translation that you could recommend to your friends who like to read for plot, because there actually a lot of stuff happens in this book, and some of it's really exciting. But if you're not big on the headiness or the philosophy of the book, you won't be able to get past that to get these nuggets of plot. So I would like to see a version that I can recommend to sort of regular people. And then the heavier version, there's very few people who I think that I can think of in my life who would want to read it.
Same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even just as a classic itself, it's already very what's the word I'm looking for? Overwhelming, or it's scary. You hear, oh, Dostoevsky. Oh yeah, no, I have not read him. I'm not interested. I hear there's a lot of you got to know stuff to read that. So I think it's very gosh, I can't think of the word right now. Intimidating. It's a very intimidating read. So I think, Sarah, you like spot on. If you had like a today's version for, yeah, I think that would be awesome. Christy?
Yeah, I have a question. So when we first started it, everybody was shocked at how easy it was to read and how exciting it was. So when did that change for you guys?
I think immediately. I think as soon as
Like
I
part
started
two?
reading it, yeah, I was like, what? Why is this like, and the thing is, it jumped right into it, which made me very happy. Like, thank you, Victoria, for being probably the only one of us that actually said what the story was about in your intro. When I watched your intro, I was like, oh, it's about murder? And then I'm like, great, it's probably one of those books where it like takes until like page 300 to even murder these people, because he's going to talk about how and why and how he would do it. And then like when he just does it like right out of the gate, I'm like, yeah, like this is going to be a good book. So yeah, I mean, right in there.
Mm-hmm. So when he starts wondering why he did it, he's like, why did I even do this? That's when it started kind of getting confusing or less accessible.
Oh, I don't think it's ever, for me, it wasn't accessible. I'm saying going in, like because I had not been familiar with Dostoevsky, it's in your head, you're just assuming like, oh, I'm not reading that because it's going to be hard to read.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I don't feel like for me it was inaccessible throughout, but I mean, I also
read a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
And I've taken classes on how to dissect these kinds of things. So for me, I mean, I'm not a good example of accessibility in books, because I've been trained to read books basically. So
I
okay,
think
thank
for
you.
me, I'm different. Like I never took English past high school. I avoided it like the plague because I didn't like writing essays. So I think for me, where it started to get a little bit more heady was when Razumikin came in, and then they started having these more discussions back and forth. And it was really anytime you got two of the characters together talking about kind of philosophy, that's when it got more difficult.
Yeah, I agree with that too. It was very readable. It was not difficult to understand. And that also goes to like a really good translation. I thought the translation I had, I was like, this is really good. But yeah, Shelley's comment there, that's more how I felt. It wasn't hard to read. It wasn't necessarily hard to understand as we were going along, but it was like more, how do these pieces come together? And you really don't know that when you're in the middle of it, right? So I think when you're in the mire and the center of the plot and the action and the characters, and you're trying to make sense of what all these characters even mean to the main character and how they relate to each other, I think that's where, you have to do work, right? It's not just, I can't just read this page and understand it. It's like, now the reader is asked to do some work. And that's not going to be for everyone. There's classics where you don't have to work as hard to understand and appreciate, this is not one of those. Like, this one takes work to really understand what's going on. And I appreciate that in a classic personally, but I know there's people who would be like, this is not why I read, kind of like what Danny was saying. If you read for enjoyment, which is totally fine, and you just read for a good story and then you move on to the next story, it's gonna hit people different ways, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, interesting. Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah. So, wow, I can't believe that we are like done. This is it. We've done it. We read it. We discussed it. We accomplished a feat. And I can't be more thankful to you three for today. This was double time. We had a longer live show today. We had a lot of questions to go over, not only for part 6 in the epilogue, but the book as a whole. So I so appreciate your dedication to that and jumping in and really helping with those questions. It's been so fun to hear your ideas, and I so thank you for your research and your thought-provoking answers. And I especially want to shout out to all of our creators who helped host our Crime and Punishment read along. So Christy, Sarah, Victoria, Laura, and Stephanie and Ramsey, thank you so much for participating. It's just, I can't be more pleased with how this turned out. I especially also want to thank everyone in the Voxer group. I mean, some of those discussions were so intense and so they went in directions that I never even would have thought of. So I want to thank everyone in those Voxer groups, and obviously everyone in between, everyone that's come to all of our live shows and participated in that. It's always fun to have interactions with the comments. So I thank you all so very much for participating. It has been so much fun. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you for
Thank you.
Thank you, Danny.
great question.
So the
Yes.
last thing I'm going to leave everybody with, for everyone in the comments, everyone watching this in replay, please take some time, subscribe to our lovely creators, Sarah here, Victoria, Christy, Ramsey, Ange, Stephanie, Laura, you know, and watch, because we may have other readathons throughout the year. All of our channels do something a little bit different, so there's always something fun happening throughout the year. We have already kind of decided that come next year, September and October, we're going to have another readathon or read along, but we're going to keep those picks quiet for right now, so that we can have the big reveal come next August. So be watchful. So make sure you're subscribed to all of us. I know that Christy, you do a ton of readathons. Sarah, you do awesome tags and whatnot on your videos. And Veronica, I'm thinking about my coworker. Victoria, your music on your channel is just outstanding. So we all have a little bit something different. It's what makes us such extraordinary creators. So thank you all so very much. I hope to see you all again very soon. And until next time, guys, I hope you're reading something great. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Danny.